Welcome to or welcome back to the Tower Yoga Podcast. I'm Kellee. I'm your host. And today I'm excited to open season 3 with a little mini series, if you will, on the Yoga Sutras. Nothing extensive, not necessarily a deep dive, but a nice intro of the background of the Yoga Sutras, which is oftentimes considered the heart of yogic philosophy, as well as getting into the first 2 sutras, which are known as like the doorway into the whole practice of yoga. I am feeling really inspired in recent years by Alan Finger's translation of the Yoga Sutras. The Tantra of the Yoga Sutras is what that translation is called. But there's lots of translations. You might have heard of the translation from BKS Iyengar or Vivekananda. There's tons of them. All good stuff. The cool thing is that you can like look into some different options and different ones are going to speak to you. And I even like to reference several different translations, and it's kind of fun. So if you don't already have a copy, maybe start with that Tantra of the Yoga Sutras. I think it's really nice for the modern mind. And then of course, having some of those other that I mentioned from Vivekananda and BK Iyengar, these kinds of things are really good too. But let's get into it. So the background of the Yoga Sutras are that they were composed. It's thought that they were composed or compiled by a sage yogi named Patanjali around the 4th century CE. There, in some more scholarly academic circles, are, I would say, debates, more so than arguments, that actually Patanjali wasn't one person or like one sage, but there was several people who came together and composed and compiled this work, and they kind of all collectively went by this sage name and like figure of Patanjali. So I'm definitely not an academic on the subject. I'm not necessarily coming at this from like a scholarly place. I'm just someone who reads them and takes them in and practices best I can. But just so you know, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you are more than welcome to. But yeah, so that's where they come from. It's a collection of 196 sutras or threads, is the loose translation from the Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the language of yoga, and the sutras are written in Sanskrit. They're translated into English in a lot of these different translations of the sutras I was talking about. And then there's usually some kind of commentary to help you contemplate. So it's you can think of them as like aphorisms in English. So it's not a rule book. It's definitely not like a book of like a manual of postures at all. I think that like asana, like postures are maybe mentioned 3 times in the whole thing, maybe. So it's not a rule book, but it's a guide for the mind and it's a guide for spiritual awakening. That's really the purpose. It distills yoga into a clear philosophy and a practice. It explains the nature of the mind, suffering, and the path to liberation. So the sutras are still relevant today, maybe even more relevant than they've ever been. So the sutras are a timeless wisdom that can be applied not only on your mat, but off your mat. And in fact, I like to kind of somatically contemplate through movement and holding in my mind's eye these sutras as themes in my physical practice. And then that's almost a way to sort of seep or steep into the like frequency or vibration of like whatever the transmission of the teaching is. And then I find that if I do that, then I can like go about my day and I like kind of remember these principles a little bit more in conversations, in like the actions I take and this sort of thing. And that's where I think that the yoga practice like really truly counts. So the yoga mat is like the training ground, if you will. Okay, so let's get right into it. I want to keep these kind of bite-sized, short and sweet for us. Yoga Sutra 1.1. So I'm going to say right now, I will try to read the Sanskrit on the first and the second one. We'll see. We might keep going, but I am still very much practicing learning all these in Sanskrit. So I don't know if I will keep this up in coming episodes with all of the sutras, but I'll try for these first 2 for sure. So Sutra 1.1 is Atta Yoga Nusasanam. And what that translates to is now the teaching of yoga begins. And so the idea is that, every morning is an invitation to begin again. Sutra 1.1 reminds us that yoga, it doesn't happen yesterday. It doesn't happen tomorrow. It doesn't happen in the past. It doesn't happen in the future. It happens right now. And that's exactly now. Now. So each breath, each moment is a chance to start fresh. Yoga Sutra 1.2, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. So in this sutra, Patanjali tells us that yoga isn't about stopping your thoughts. That's impossible. But it's more about softening their grip. So in life, even as the present moment moves, the present moment isn't actually still. It's moving. Even as the present moment moves, awareness becomes the anchor that steadies the mind. And oftentimes, like in the physical practice, in the asana practice, we'll use our breath as that anchor. But the breath is really the vehicle for our consciousness to travel through in order to be in our bodies, to be in the moment. So that anchor you can think of as the breath, but really the breathable is something that awareness is moving through, if that makes sense. Even as the present moment moves, awareness becomes the anchor that steadies the mind. So it's saying you can go through the movements, you can go through the motions, and you might have had that experience before when you're driving in your car and you get somewhere and you're like, whoa, how the heck am I here now? You got there, you did that, you're where you need to be, but you don't have any recollection of the direct experience of the process of getting there. And so there is a way that one might go about practicing yoga. And I've done it before where we're halfway in class and I'm like, whoa, where have I been? You can go through the motions essentially, but that's not yoga. The practice of yoga doesn't happen in a daydream. There's lots of different states of mind. Dreaming is one of them. And we'll get there in later sutras. So I'll just kind of leave that for here, leave that for this time, and then we will keep going. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. And I, want to wish you happy contemplating. Bye-bye.